Good morning.
Good morning.
You win. It's 9 o'clock and you're on time. Good morning. My name is Heather Harding. I am a 1992 alumni of Teach for America. I taught in Eastern North Carolina. Woohoo! Come on, y'all got to give me a little bit more than that. Woohoo! ENC! Anyway, we are here today to talk about all the things that happen outside of the K-12 classroom. As I said, my name is Heather. I'm a senior program officer at the Gates Foundation. And the Gates Foundation work over the last 8 years in K-12 education has been very focused on the technical aspects. So it really excites me to introduce the panel of leaders today who are going to talk about all those things that happen outside of the K-12 classroom. We know now, the research tells us that the quality of the teaching inside the classroom is the most important thing we can lever, but that's not the whole picture. And in particular, as we become more sophisticated and complex in our ability to understand how to really close that opportunity gap, we know that all the things that happen before those beautiful little faces show up, all the things that have to happen once the school doors close, and then beyond for graduation, because we don't want to just see kids get to college. We want to see them through so that they have real opportunities to change their life trajectory. So I want to welcome you. I want to congratulate you for getting your breakfast and getting in the seats. I'm sure we're going to have lots of people who come in. And then I'm going to turn it over. We are, again, starting from the cradle and not quite getting to the grave in our list of presenters today. Each of them is going to share a little bit about their work. And then if we have some time at the end, we'll do a little Q&A and discussion. But thank you again for your attention. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Kutner.
Thanks so much, Heather, and thanks for everyone for being here and allowing me to share my story today about how I've come to think about expanding the scope of education. My career started in college as an American Studies major, sitting around talking about the world's problems. By the end of college, I really wanted to get out and do something about it. I wasn't at a school that was prestigious enough for Teach for America to recruit from, so I didn't know anything about Teach for America yet. So I joined AmeriCorps and recruited and trained reading tutors for the public school system. And that was the first time I really saw the achievement gap firsthand and really realized that our zip codes can determine our destinies. And I saw the individual power that a teacher can have in that setting to do something about it. And that's when I learned about Teach for America and joined the Corps in 2000 and was placed in rural Louisiana, where I had the most amazing experience on the bayou in the middle of the sugarcane fields. There were two things that really shaped my perspective as an educator teaching in this environment. The first one was the frustration that came from trying to teach everyone the same thing at the same time in the same way. Our district had a pacing chart, and there was an objective for each day of the week and each week of the year, and we had to march through it. So the highest performing children were getting bored, and the children who didn't even have the prerequisite skills to access that day's objective were totally tuning out. So I asked my principal for permission to do more of a centers-based instructional approach where I could group my children homogenously and then teach them lessons that were at their level using hands-on materials. And I saw that they actually closed the gap so much more efficiently and effectively when they worked at material that was on their level. The second thing that really shaped my perspective was that we had corporal punishment at our school. And the principal had a paddle on her wall, and she would beat the children when they were sent to her office. And so I never wanted to send my children to the principal's office, which is pretty challenging when you're a first-year Corps member and you're not so great at classroom management yet. Or maybe that was just me being back in the 2000 Corps, I'm not sure. So I used a lot of positive, extrinsic motivation, everything imaginable. I passed out individual raffle tickets when children were making good choices. I had team points. We had a whole class path to success. We had a superstar student of the week and a super duper star student of the week, everything under the sun. And the truth is, it worked like magic. My children were motivated, they were kind, they loved school, their achievement scores skyrocketed, but then they would graduate onto 4th grade and it would all dissipate. And at first I thought it was because I was a first-year teacher, so I stayed for my second year, and then the same thing happened. So I stayed for a third year, and the same thing happened again. And so I started to realize that I wasn't truly having the kind of transformational impact that I wanted to have in the classroom. So my thinking went that I should move to a school where there was consistently good teaching year after year after year after year, and that would lead to the transformation. So I was lucky enough to find my way to the original KIPP school in Houston and work alongside some of the most dedicated and passionate educators that I have ever met in my life. They taught me so much about relentless pursuit, about believing in all children, about doing whatever it takes to help children. In that environment, I also started asking a lot of questions about the factory model of education. I thought a lot about myself as a white woman, primarily teaching children of color, and what it meant that I felt like I had a very strong emphasis on obedience and compliance and following directions, when those weren't the primary skills that I want children of color from low-income communities to learn or to master. I don't think those are going to set them up for success in the 21st century workplace. And I also just started thinking about our college persistence rates. We had done so much to improve college persistence for children from low-income communities, but there was still this huge gap between where our high-income children are. And so I started doing observations at elite private schools to see if there was another model of education. And I walked into a Montessori classroom, and within 2 minutes, I knew my whole life had to change. Instead of looking like a factory with everyone doing the same thing at the same time in the same way, it looked like a Google workplace. There was a child this was a 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classroom. There was a child on the floor studying decimals, not by memorizing math or chanting math. He was holding it in his hands and deeply understanding the concept. There was another child sitting at the desk studying her spelling words for the week. Another child was meeting with the teacher to go over her goals for the week. And it looked like a micro society. And it made so much sense that if we want to prepare our children for this future that we can only begin to imagine, that we should structure our classrooms in ways that look a lot more like that future, a future that requires really complicated interactions and collaboration and problem solving and critical thinking. There was a snack on the counter when the children were hungry. They could serve themselves and clean up after themselves. And the thing that really got me, I'm embarrassed to say this, but there was a bathroom in the classroom, and so the children could use the restroom whenever they needed to. They didn't have to ask anyone for permission. We weren't lining them up and squirting the soap in their hands and timing them. It was the most humane environment, and it made so much sense to start young. And this, in Montessori, we start with children from infants. And the idea is that we need to teach freedom with responsibility, and that's one of the most important things we can teach, and that we should start teaching that at a really young age. And so much of the work I had done, we always structured everything so much and would give the freedom at the end. We'd start giving the freedom in 11th grade or 12th grade to prepare children for college, but the concept of learning how to handle freedom with responsibility takes a really long time to learn. And so in this one classroom observation, it embedded me in this idea of the importance of needing to start young. So I went and got my Montessori certification and taught in public Montessori schools in districts in Denver and in Houston. And then in that model, I really missed my charter school people, and that's where the idea of Montessori for All was born. There was a lot of frustration of trying to implement Montessori in a district model, and a lot of battles that took a lot of energy away from the children. And so I started a nonprofit organization that aspires to open high-performing, authentic Montessori schools in diverse communities nationwide. We have a 4-pronged approach to change. The first one is to open schools as proof points in diverse communities to show that a different model for education is possible. As we're doing that, we want to codify and disseminate what we're learning, because we don't want to be an island of excellence. We really want to be impacting a broader reach of children. We also want to create teacher training centers that teach the curriculum that we're codifying. And finally, we want to partner with school districts, because we know that charters are not going to take over the world in our lifetime. And if we really want to move the needle for kids, we need to get back into a district setting and support districts with blueprints and tools that they need to move the needle for children. So we blend the best of authentic, pure Montessori schools with the best of practices from high-performing charter schools, and that's what Montessori for All does. We are intentionally a diverse by design school. This one was actually a really hard choice. It's hard to feel like you're ever giving up a spot that would be taken by a low-income child and giving it to a middle-class child, but we believe that all children, racially, culturally, and socioeconomically, need to be taught together and need to learn from each other if we're going to bring about racial equity in our world. We believe that all children need to learn how to navigate and appreciate lines of difference so that they can become leaders in a multicultural society. So we opened our first school in Austin in 2014. We opened with pre-K 3 through 3rd grade. Then we added an infant and toddler program. We hope to also offer a prenatal program so that we're connecting with families as early as possible to support children and help close the gap before it even starts. We are expanding into San Antonio in 2017 and then expanding nationally in 2018. In our first year, we raised about $2.5 million in startup funding. We had 700 applications for just 300 spots. In year 2, we had 11 times as many applications as spots. We not only met the state's higher academic accountability ratings, but we also achieved 2 out of 3 possible distinctions. We were financially sustainable on federal and state revenue in year 1, which is pretty exciting. Texas has terrible per pupil funding. I was sitting next to a principal in DC yesterday who says his pre-K 3 children bring in $14,000. Ours bring in about $3,600. And then we hosted more than 50 national visitors. We're really trying to help push the conversation about what's possible for children. We believe that if we're going to create a more just and peaceful world, that we need to focus on children and how children are educated, that we should focus on helping children close the achievement gap, but also find joy and meaning in their lives and support them to work in partnership with others to do the same. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hi. Thank you, Sarah. That was, I think, a good segue into what I'm going to focus on. I am Sophia Pappas, and I currently run the Early Childhood Ed Division in the New York City Department of Education. So we have the privilege of running the New York City pre-K program for about 68,000 kids. And what I'm going to focus on is really how my experience as a pre-K corps member in Newark, New Jersey shaped my understanding of how pre-K can address inequities we see in K-12, help close the achievement gap, and where there are possibilities for collaboration between pre-K and K-12. How many of you have heard something about how pre-K can help level the playing field and make sure all kids have a strong foundation? Okay, so we're all pretty familiar with this idea. When I was a pre-K teacher in Newark, New Jersey, I had the opportunity to really see what's possible, given that I had all the resources I could want for a full-day pre-K. New Jersey has what's called an Abbott pre-K program. It was put in place by a court mandate at the state level, which basically meant that pre-K got equitable funding for what we had in K-12 to help close the achievement gap. That was one of the goals. So when I was in pre-K, it wasn't a resource constraint issue, but I did see over the course of the year the kinds of practices that are necessary to make the most of that opportunity. And I also saw, because I was in a pre-K to 5 school, where there were gaps in K to 5, where there were things happening, especially if kids hadn't had the pre-K year, that pre-K could help prevent. So it was actually kind of an accident that I came to this realization where, long story, I won't go into it, but I had to have a whole kindergarten class in my class one day because kindergarten teachers were unexpectedly not there. So I was looking at my pre-K kids and kindergarten students, many of whom hadn't gone to pre-K. And what was really interesting was they were really good at certain things, the kindergarten students who hadn't gone to pre-K, and not so strong in others. So a lot of them could perfectly write their names. And they could, they were going around the classroom, even during center time, copying down words, and they were really strong in that. But when it came time to us coming together as a group to problem solve, I think we were reading The Little Red Hen, and we were trying to come up with ways that she could work better with her friends, get them to help her bake the bread, and there was just a pause, or just like dead silence, and they really had trouble coming up with creative ideas. Versus our pre-K students who had been doing this kind of problem-solving, critical thinking in story time, in play time. So it just got me thinking that there are gaps that we see in K and in the early grades that aren't necessarily the gaps that we often talk about. They're often talking about basic early literacy and math skills, which of course are important, but if we think about how the early years lay the foundation for kids to continue to be successful, this piece about problem solving, using language to express yourself and to express ideas, that was also a critical gap that teachers in my school weren't talking about either. So when they would talk about kindergarten readiness, it was much more in basic literacy skills like knowing their ABCs, knowing their letter sounds. So through that experience, I just thought more and more about what my responsibility was in pre-K. So what did I have to do when my kids were in blocks, when my kids were experimenting in the Science Center to help develop their brains and their thinking skills so that when they got to kindergarten and beyond, when they were moving ahead with a Common Core, they could think critically, they could think for themselves, and they could work well with others. So that became a really important piece of what I was doing in pre-K as a teacher. But the other side of it really had to do with the families. So there was mixed family involvement in my school, but what I saw in pre-K was a really important opportunity. My parents or relatives or other caregivers came and dropped off their kids and picked them up every day. They had to because they were 4. So this really was a unique opportunity to establish a strong partnership and to work with families as partners to help them understand how they could be involved in their child's education. So what I took away from that was pre-K, if we talk about it as a way to lay a foundation for kids to be successful, really has to be about the teacher seizing that moment with kids and families to have a solid foundation. And so fast forward, when I eventually came to the DOE to run the pre-K program, and under Mayor de Blasio had a really unique opportunity to help level the playing field. So basically, when the mayor came in, he made a commitment to provide full-day, high-quality pre-K to every child in the city. So basically what he's promising is that all kids would have the benefit of a whole additional year where they could be enriched, engaged, and their families could be brought in as partners. And so for me, this was an incredible extension of an opportunity that I had seen with just my 15 children to have an impact on thousands and thousands of children across the city. And do it in a way that would be sustainable over time, because we were essentially adding a new grade and adding an expectation among families and voters that they would have full-day pre-K for their children. And so what we basically tried to do was to figure out, okay, we have the leadership in place, we have the resources, how do we make sure that we actually do reach every family, that we do create opportunities that families are taking advantage of. It wasn't enough for us to say, we put all these seats out there. We wanted to make sure that families were taking advantage of those opportunities, and that the programs, once they were there, were actually tailored to the needs of each child so that we could make the most of those investments. So a big focus that we have, I have the list of our settings here, which is really important to think about pre-K playing this role as laying a foundation and making sure we are doing it in an equitable way. So as you can imagine, families with their young children may have different preferences. So we actually do have a lot of families who don't want to have their kids in district schools or do want to have their kids in district schools. And so if we want to create a system that really maximizes participation among all communities, we had to be responsive to family preferences. So some families gravitated towards district schools because they wanted their kids in the big school from the beginning, or maybe their siblings were there. So we established more programs in district schools. But we also saw that some families weren't comfortable sending their kids in a building with older children, and they really wanted to be in a place where it was solely focused on early childhood, and where often their kids were actually receiving services as younger children through programs like Head Start and childcare. So we, as a result, and many other factors, we contract with community-based organizations that we call early education centers. And this actually played a big role in more families taking advantage of what we were doing, but also enabling us to reach low-income communities in New York City, because many families that were low income were already in those centers when their children were 3 or 2. And because that was so important, we also built into our enrollment system the ability for families who were with their children as 3-year-olds in these programs to matriculate up if they wanted to stay in that program. And charter schools, for the first time in our expansion, were able to offer pre-K. It was a result of a change in state law, but this was also another opportunity to reach more families and to make a connection with K-12. So in many of these district schools and charter schools, there is that direct connection with K-12 because they're in that school. But we also created other ways for the community-based organizations to connect with K-12. So one of the biggest ways is that we have learning standards in pre-K that are aligned with the K-12 Common Core. But those only cover math and literacy, so we also focus on social emotional development, approaches to learning, and physical development to meet the needs of the whole child. And pre-K centers are just another model that we created because we didn't have enough space or seats to meet the needs of all children. So we built some buildings. We also used underutilized space in schools to create pre-K exclusive DOE-run organizations. And so we have this great opportunity. We have the mayor behind us. But another big piece of equity that I saw when I was a teacher as an issue was that because pre-K is not mandatory, there were families who either didn't know about it or chose not to participate. So one of the big things that the mayor put in place was an entire outreach team, basically political style campaign or people who had worked at the community level, whose sole job it is to work one-on-one with families to help them understand their options and basically walk them through the enrollment process. So that was a big emphasis because it's one thing to have diverse options, it's another thing to take advantage of them. The last thing that I'll emphasize, I won't go through all of this, but in terms of thinking about pre-K connected with K-12, because oftentimes there is a disconnect, and so what happens in pre-K kind of stays in pre-K and doesn't always persist. We made sure that for all of these diverse settings, we were setting consistent expectations. So whether you're in a district school or in a community-based center or in a charter school, you had to meet what we call the New York City Pre-K for All standards. But these standards were aligned with what Chancellor Farina put together for K-12, which she calls the Framework for Great Schools. And it's important is that there is a section on rigorous and developmentally appropriate instruction, but there's also family engagement. There's also supportive environments that have a whole section on equity and excellence. So we are really excited to hold all of our programs to these standards, but to also give them flexibility in how they meet them. So yes, everyone has to have a play-based approach to pre-K. Everyone has to have ways to individualize instruction and to use portfolio-based assessments to understand where kids are. But then what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, what curriculum they're using. We have some programs that use Montessori model, Reggio Emilio, and then we have other published curricula like Creative and Tools of the Mind. So we give that flexibility, but then we have the same expectations for how they tailor their approach to meet the needs of every child in the state pre-K learning standards. And then one more thing that I'll emphasize is this dual language component. We established dual language programs, but we also wanted to make sure that there was continuity with K-12 so that it just wasn't what was happening in pre-K. And so we worked with the DOE's Early Learning Division to make sure our expectations for dual language were the same as in K-12, and that we were prioritizing the placement of dual language programs in pre-K where kids would likely feed into a kindergarten dual language program. So this is sort of a quick summary of what we did, but the basic idea here is we came into the Pre-K for All expansion knowing the research on how important pre-K is and how it could make a difference, and we've basically been focusing ever since on making the most of that opportunity through how we allocate seats, how we outreach to families, and how we measure and support quality to make sure that every child actually does benefit and get the foundations that they need to be successful. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Alejandro. I'm the CEO and founder of Springboard Collaborative, and I'm joined here with Ken McFarland, who's a parent leader. We've been asked to hop into another session after our presentation, so we apologize in advance that we can't hang out for the Q&A. We'll miss you terribly. My dad is a Chilean playwright. He was taken as a political prisoner in the 70s while directing Libertad, Libertad, a play in protest of Pinochet's dictatorship. After years of torture, he was luckier than most to make it out alive when he was exiled to Paris, where he met my mother. My mom is the youngest of 12 siblings in Puerto Rico. She was the first in her family to go to college, after which she won a scholarship to attend grad school at the Sorbonne. The two met at a theater festival where my dad pretended that he had the perfect role for my mom, and she pretended she was an actress. They formed a group and they traveled the world performing social justice theater. My sister was born in Colombia, I popped out in the Netherlands, and eventually we hunkered down in Puerto Rico before my parents made the decision to immigrate to the US so that my sister and I could have access to better educational opportunities. Growing up in a household that was short on money but long on ambition taught me two things that are at the core of Springboard. One is that a child's education involves much more than just their schooling, and two is that parents' love for their children is the single greatest and most underutilized natural resource in education. So after graduating from Harvard in 2009, I joined TFA and moved to Philly to make my best attempt at being a first grade teacher in one of the city's most impoverished barrios. In my students, I saw myself, and in their families, I saw my own. In my first year of teaching, it wasn't until November 28th, 83 days into the school year, that my students' reading levels finally caught up to where they had been before the summer. I asked other teachers in my school what was going on, and they all shared in this matter-of-fact way, that's just the summer slide. As if it were a law of nature that growing up poor, for every 2 steps forward you take during the year, you're going to take a step back during the summer. I dug into the research and saw that across low-income communities, children experience a 3-month regression in reading skills every summer, and this adds up year after year to the point that 2/3 of the achievement gap we see in high school is attributable to summer learning loss in elementary school. But what I couldn't figure out is why are these losses unique to low-income communities? Children in the suburbs have every bit as long a summer break as my students did, but they don't regress. What's the difference? Over time, I realized that summer learning loss is symptomatic of a deeper problem. Parents in underserved communities have been left out of the process of educating their kids. Children spend 75% of their waking hours outside of the classroom, yet our nation does shockingly little to capture any educational value from that time for low-income kids. If you picture a child's time as an orange, their classroom experience represents a relatively small wedge, yet our national conversation is fixated on squeezing more and more juice from that wedge. I'm more interested in the question of how we squeeze any juice at all from the rest of the orange.
Good morning. I was a voracious reader as a child. My parents, they subscribed to the go read a book philosophy. So morning, noon, and night, those words echoed throughout our household. The only issue was that we didn't have a great many books in the house. There was the King James Bible and a set of old, outdated encyclopedias in which the world was still flat. So, and I exaggerate, but the fact of the matter is that you can imagine when I discovered the library and I was given that magical card where I could take out as many books as I could hold in my book bag. I filled it to the brim, and I trucked and walked home, sun, snow, and by the time I got home, my mother rebuked me for having so many books, taking out so many books and ruining my book bag. But somewhere on those trips home, I decided that when I became a parent, I would have a household that was filled with books, so that all my children needed to do was just outstretch their hand and be transported to wherever those books would take them. So fast forward to when I became a parent, my wife and I became parents, you know, baby food, formula, diapers, books. And I learned what a lot of people learn, that you have theories and they're attacked by reality. So just having books in a home doesn't make readers, right? We have to do the work. And I learned the hard way that we needed to do more work. So this is my daughter here. So my second daughter became a voracious reader because we surrounded her with books, but we did more than just read to her, we read with her. So I got 2 copies of books, and I'm a grown man, obviously, but I know way more than I should about all of the tween books and Katniss Everdeen and so on and so forth. So that was a success story in itself. But my son, as a young black male in West Philadelphia, he has a different set of realities and circumstances, and I couldn't roll the dice with him. So instead of hopes and dreams of him becoming a success or a reader, I needed bona fide ways and means to make that happen. So he was doing okay, he was doing fine, but his kindergarten teacher approached me about Springboard Media. Springboard was a summer program, so right in June, we entered into Springboard, and it's a reading program. And it set us up with guidelines to produce readers, right? So obviously I can read, but I'm not a teacher. I mean, I am a teacher, but I'm not lettered as in teaching as you are. So it set us up with guidelines, and it really, really made a difference. And I think within 5 weeks, he probably made, months of progress. The summer deficit didn't happen to Marcus. So he skipped over that, and he was at an advantage moving into September.
I founded Springboard Collaborative to tackle America's literacy crisis at its root. Our primary offering is an intensive 5-week summer program that combines daily reading instruction for pre-K through 3rd graders, weekly workshops training parents to teach reading at home, and an incentive structure through which we award learning tools to families, from books to tablets, in proportion to their children's reading progress. Since launch 4 years ago, we've grown from 40 families in Philadelphia to almost 4,000 that we'll have in Philadelphia, Oakland, and starting this year in DC. Last summer, our scholars replaced what would have been a 3-month reading loss with a 3.3-month reading gain. They came back to school in September, having more than doubled their annual reading progress. In schools with fewer than 10% of parents showing up for report card conferences, our weekly family training workshops averaged 94%. This doesn't happen because we hire some superstar teachers to work their magic during the summer. Our model's about helping school communities get more from the people and assets they already have. In each of our partners, we train their existing teachers to effectively engage the families of their struggling readers in order to make more progress together than any of them could individually. Alongside Springboard's geographic expansion, we've also been growing our product line to include a school year intervention as well as a lighter touch online offering. By training parents and teachers to collaborate, Springboard puts kids on a path that closes the reading achievement gap by 4th grade. This gives kids the requisite foundational literacy skills they need to access the rest of their education and realize their full potential. We're missing a picture, which is a bummer because what it was is it's a photo of my mom dropping me off for my first day of school 20 years ago. And when I asked Ken to share pictures with me, he sent a picture of his wife dropping Marcus off for school last year. And what struck me about those pictures is that in these parents' eyes, you see the same timeless expression, an expression of unconditional love and soaring aspirations, an unwavering commitment. And it struck home for me because it helped to underscore that the children we see in school don't exist in a vacuum. Their families send them every morning, and their families receive them every afternoon. These are the people that know their children best, that love them for a lifetime, and that have the most at stake. So, it took a long time for the education field to embrace the idea that all children can learn, and I think there's still progress to make on that front. But it's Springboard's ambition and our charge to prove that all parents can teach. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ami Eubanks Davis, and I'm the CEO and founder of Braven. So since we're on the little children theme, this is a picture of me from back in the day. Look at those legs. And I'm sure there's some folks in here from KIP. One of the KIP mantras is that the promises that we make to children are sacred. And I definitely would say that as a 1995 core member. Who has had the great privilege of watching my students grow up. I like to think we all grew up together. They're now in their early 30s, which is mind-blowing. I saw one of my former students last night, who's an alum of Teach for America. And I have to say, when my first group of 6th graders started to matriculate through college, I have to say I started to have some different thoughts about what needed to be true outside of K-12. So raise your hand if you have ever told a student to go to college. All right, so did I. Now, raise your hand if you thought that there would be a 9% likelihood of them getting through if they happen to be from a low-income family. All right, so that is what the reality is in our country for our students. We do an awesome job of recruiting lots of amazing talent like Andrea Swartz, who's in the bottom right-hand corner here, who's one of my colleagues at Braven, of getting top talent into classrooms to help close the academic achievement gap in K-12. Andrea did this incredibly well at her high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she was a 2007 core member. And she taught Austin Hutchinson and his classmates AP Language Arts. That said, when she sent them off to college, one of the things that she didn't quite realize, nor did I, was that 70% of Americans raised at the bottom of the income ladder never make it to the middle. And that college graduates, however, are 5 times more likely to leave the bottom. So one thing that I started to realize as I was watching my own students go through college was that college is currency. However, what I didn't realize was that students from higher income backgrounds were 8 times more likely to graduate with a bachelor's degree by 24, and that's up from 6 times more likely in 1970. So basically it means that we have really not moved the dial when it comes to college completion. The other thing I did not realize until I was watching my students who'd done everything right, like Austin Hutchinson and Andrea Swartz's students, was that if they were African American and they gained a bachelor's degree, they were twice as likely to end up unemployed, which was just so crazy for me to basically watch some of my former students who'd done everything right their families had worked so hard to get them through school, actually walk out of college and not have the ability to gain a strong first job. And I also was watching my students, if they did get a first job, be significantly underemployed in comparison to their peers. I think many of you all probably know, because this is a K-12 room, that there are about 478 young people per high school guidance counselor, which we all know is completely unfortunate and needs to change, and there are a lot of organizations that are working to change that. What I didn't realize, again, until my own students hit college, Andrea's students started to hit college, was that on average there are 2,300 students per career services advisor. And what that means is that there is pretty much no one giving our students career readiness skills or advice, or honestly giving them the networks that they need to get a strong first job. In this country, networks rule when it comes to getting a job. And everyone here should really think about it. Yep, look at this. This is a big network of 15,000 people that were in this weekend. But networks are really how things get done. So Austin went to Hampton University, was doing incredibly well there. He was also working and going to school. So he had just made an incredible journey through the doors of college, was on his way out, had strong grades, was also working full-time to get to school. And he then applies to Teach for America. So Andrea's over the moon, people like me are over the moon. At this point in time, I'm actually running human capital at Teach for America. I think many people know at the height of the recruitment years of Teach for America, we were recruiting close to 50,000, mainly young people, to the teaching corps. What a lot of people don't know, though, is we were recruiting approximately 30,000 young people to the staff of Teach for America, because the organization was just growing tremendously. We were opening up 100, 200 roles every couple months. And so we were beginning to see more of our former students, like Austin, applying to Teach for America, which was thrilling, completely thrilling. However, what we realized was that they were having a much tougher time getting over our selection bars. And clearly, there was more that Teach for America could do and did do to really think about how do you reduce bias in selection. That said, as someone who was in a position to make some of the final calls on some of our former students, I was alarmed by the thousands and thousands of young people who happen to come from low-income communities, who'd done everything right, were coming out of college, who were really struggling to get through our admissions process. And what I knew was that there were a bunch of other organizations that they deserved to go work for who were not going to rethink their selection criteria. And Austin was one of these candidates, and he was waitlisted, which was just devastating for Andrea and for a lot of other people. He also, as you all can probably tell, is an African-American man. So he's a person who could help increase the 2% of black men in the teaching field. So this was just really such a wake-up call for all of us in the world of Teach for America, that there was something dreadfully missing between education to employment, and K-12 education alone was just no longer enough. So this is really where the world of Braven came from. I happen to be the founder, but it is a co-founding team, so there are folks in the audience like Leah and Tierney and Siobhan and a whole bunch of other people who've really helped to build this vision. But we started to believe that at least 100,000 young people in this country should be able to go through college and leave and get strong first jobs. And this number actually came from us studying talent pipelines in the country. So for example, next month, we're all, or a lot of us rather, will be very focused on March Madness. There are 425,000 NCAA athletes. We have no trouble in this country finding a young person who plays golf, tennis, soccer, basketball, football, finding them, identifying them, and cultivating that talent over time. There's also another pipeline in this country that is completely devastating, but it is still a talent pipeline, which is the school to prison pipeline. It's got 90,000 kids in it. If a kid isn't reading by 3rd grade, not doing algebra by 9th grade, they're more likely, if they're like me, where I grew up in low-income communities on the south side of the city of Chicago, to end up going to prison than through college. So we basically started to ask ourselves a question like, what would it take to get at least 100,000 young people, not only through the doors of college, but into strong first jobs? It led us to develop a model where we discover, develop, and connect young people to the skills that they need and the connections that they need. And what we've started to realize by working solely in higher ed was that we could actually help increase college persistence and graduation rates, that we actually could help young people develop the record of achievement that they needed to actually get a strong first job, which is what folks like Teach for America people are looking at. Like, what did you do in your background? What does leadership look like? Do you have project management skills? And then finally, helping them gain employment 6 months after college. We are working with two big state universities, San Jose State and Rutgers Newark. And San Jose State has been just an incredible partner, but it's also been incredible to watch other partners in K-12 be in that space and us be able to work with them. So for example, when we started our pilot work there were 84 KIPP students that were alums of KIPP, and now at San Jose State, now there are 120 KIPP students at San Jose State. And so we literally are seeing our former students in higher ed. And it's amazing to watch them not only get through, but also be really hungry to get that next step out. And so what we did is we actually convinced young professionals to become leadership coaches of teams of 5 to 7, just think posse. And they actually coached them through a really, really rigorous hybrid online and in-person course. We basically took a lot of what we've built on the staff side of Teach for America in terms of operating and managing, reasoning and strategic thinking, and effectively communicating skills, and made it a class. A bunch of us are former teachers and talent nerds. And it's been really incredible to watch pretty quickly not only a network develop around a group of students, but also we now have employers coming to us asking us about the talent, because the students that we work with are a highly diverse and talented bunch. So Austin Hutchinson thankfully got off of the wait list at Teach for America. Andrea, who was on our recruitment team at the time, I'm sure was calling lots of her colleagues saying, what in the world is going on? He has to have a spot here. He got off the wait list, and he is a 2013 Corps member in South Louisiana, and last year, in his first year, he was honored to be awarded St. Helena's High School Teacher of the Year. Lots of work ahead, he says on his Facebook page. Year 2, we got this. So I hear the snaps in the room. This is what we're all about. We're about seeing our kids become our leaders over time, and it's been amazing to see how important it is to actually do what KIPP says in the first part of their statement, that the promises to children are sacred, and a Braven belief has become, and those promises should be true when they are adults. So I hope that you will check us out online as we build this very early movement to ensure that our students get through college and out with strong jobs.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm already mic'd up. And is this the clicker? All right, so is it going to bother anyone if I come off the stage? Good. I'm way too antsy to sit on the stage the whole time. All right, my name is Michael Sorrell. I'm the president at Paul Quinn College, and I have to tell you it is an honor to be here. One of the reasons it's an honor to be here is as a college president, I am always scouting for talent. So I'm not saying that higher education is in your future, but if you're interested in higher education, I might have a job for you. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is the Paul Quinn College story, and we call it Poverty, Nation Building, and the New Urban College Model. So there are 3 issues that you need to understand that we were trying to attack at Paul Quinn College. The first was the college itself. When I got there in 2007, we were not a very good college. All right, to be honest with you, we were one of the worst colleges in the country. And that's the truth, because our accrediting body tried to take away our accreditation and told me we were one of the worst colleges in the country. All right, so you can imagine that that's a little bit humbling. Boston Consulting Group did a study in 2006 before I got there that said we were so bad that if we didn't make a radical change, we'd be out of business within a year and a half. Okay, that news was greeted by the president at that moment with him packing up his bags in the middle of the night and getting out of there. All right, which led to the board calling me and asking me, would I be interested in being a president? Now, something you need to keep in mind, when people call you up and offer you a job that you didn't apply for, there are 2 reasons for that, right? The first is you are amazing. All right, now if you sit there and start thinking, I'm amazing, you have an ego problem, all right? The second reason is because no one else wanted the job. Nobody else wanted this job. All right, so we had a single-digit graduation rate. We had low morale. Students were unhappy. No one liked us. I've never seen an institution so small that had created such ill will. All right, so that's where we were. Our backs were against the wall. But the reality of it is we were unencumbered by a history of success. So we could do whatever the hell we wanted to do going forward, right? So the second thing you need to understand is about our students. Our students come from under-resourced communities, all right? 80 to 85% of our students on an annual basis are Pell Grant students, okay? Some years this is as high as 90. And the thing about that is our expected family contribution for over 70% of our student body is 0. There's no margin of error. The student profile for our school is a 2.7 GPA, 1132 on the SAT, and by the way, that's all 3 sections, and 17 on the ACT. So what you get the sense of is that our students are not considered college ready. All right? We recruit from the inner cities of this country. We go into, and not the inner city magnet schools, right? We are going into the inner city schools where people have told these students that they just don't matter. We think they matter. Second issue we had to face is the community surrounding our college. All right, this is what it looks like. Half of the people earn less than $30,000 a year. The other half of the people are not in the workforce. And 84% of the people in the community surrounding our college have a high school education or less. By the way, 97% of the people in that neighborhood are minority. One other thing you need to know, we are 10 minutes from downtown Dallas. We are just 10 minutes south. It is as if we are in a different world. If you're in the north part of our city, you think it's one of the greatest cities in the country. If you are in the southern part of our city, you are pissed off on a daily basis, right? And pardon my language, I went to Catholic schools. All right. The third issue is we thought that we were dealing with a problem that was peculiar to ourselves. Turns out it's not. There are 1,153 urban colleges in this country, okay? 31% of all the minorities living in poverty live in urban areas. Side note, 19% of all people in poverty live in urban areas. And lastly, nearly 60% of first-year college students are not deemed college ready. So this isn't a Paul Quinn problem. This is an American problem. So we set out to solve America's problem. And this is how we did it. Phase 1, we developed a hashtag nation-building mindset. Because let's be honest, if you don't have a hashtag now, you don't matter. All right? So we are hashtag nation-building. And it's based on 3 premises. Number 1, we think everyone can learn. We think the idea that some people aren't as gifted as others is garbage, right? We think everyone can learn. The question is, are you up to the task of teaching them? Number 2, poverty is evil. No one in a country with the wealth of the United States should grow up in poverty. It is unjust, it is wrong, and it is a moral failing on all of our parts that we allow this to exist. So we have attacked poverty as the evil that it is. And lastly, your limitations can never be allowed to determine my reality. Just because you can't see the greatness in me doesn't mean I won't grow up to be great. That's what we tell our students, that's what we tell our community, and that's what we tell the people who are telling them that they can't be great. Your second phase of the solution, you have to have an action plan. So we developed the Nation Building Action Plan. This is our formula for success. We preach hope. If you grow up in an under-resourced community, you've been told your whole life, either explicitly or implicitly, that you don't matter. That life's not quite going to be the same for you that it is for everyone else. Right? More importantly, and this is along the lines of Martin Seligman's learned optimism, if you don't have hope, everything that happens to you, you tend to see as an outsized failing that is your fault. You don't see stumbles as stumbles. Every stumble is a fall. So we preach hope relentlessly. Number 2, you have to practice patience. I was a college athlete. I was a college basketball player. But when I was 7 years old and I started playing basketball, I was terrible, right? If there weren't rules that everybody had to play a quarter, I would have never gotten off the bench. But someone had to be patient with me, right? So we have to learn to be patient with others. We weren't always great at what it is we're great at. Practice patience daily. Instill resilience. You have to teach people when they fall to get back up, right? It's just that simple. But if you are from places where the benefits of resilience don't exist, you have to very intentionally be taught to be resilient. So we tell our students, we've got you. You're gonna be okay. So what if this came up short? It'll be better tomorrow. See yourself in a continuum. Greatness one step at a time. Next, teach entrepreneurship. This is more than just teaching people to go out and get rich. Although I think it is wrong to tell people from under-resourced communities that they shouldn't aspire for wealth. All right, I tell my students all the time, my job is to convince you to be wealthy. I'm going to try and steer you into disciplines that will make wealth. Not because I don't think other disciplines are unimportant, but I think that if you have grown up poor your whole lives, how about we have an honest conversation about how cool it is to have money? Right? I mean, it's amazing to me how people want to tell poor people, just get a job. No, get a career that changes the trajectory of you and your family's lives. That's what we're doing. So this is about entrepreneurial thought and entrepreneurial action. Stop waiting for someone else to solve the problems of your community. Solve them yourself. And then the last one, always lead with love. The single most important lesson that I've been taught as a college president, I learned my first summer as a president. I was very young. I came in, I'd been suckered into taking a job that was stressing me out, and I was got into a yelling match with a student, a young man on my campus, right? And you know, we're yelling at each other and yelling, he comes up to my office, we're still yelling, and then he breaks down in tears. Now, I didn't really know what to do with that, right? I mean, I'd been yelling at him, so I didn't really feel like I could hug him, and you know, I'm kind of like a dude, so I was like, right? Like, it was an awkward situation. And we had a staff member, her name was Evelyn Dickerson, and she was a quintessential, like, Southern mother, right? So the student leaves, and she kind of sits up in a chair, and she says to me, she says, baby, I met your mother, and your mother was tough, but your mother loved you with everything that she had in you. I would dare say you have never spent 1 second of your life wondering if you were loved. She's like, you have been overloved. She said, now, when you grew up like that, you don't hear tough as tough. You hear tough as love. But if you grew up without love, do you hear anything other than tough? She said, you have to lead with love. Changed my whole mindset. Now, it caused me to have to do some uncomfortable things, right? I had to start being more open. I had to start, I mean, I've never seen a presidential model where presidents told their students they loved them, right? No, President Oberlin didn't tell us he loved us. The Duke president definitely didn't tell us he loved us, right? Said, well, your check clear, okay? But the point is, you've got to, and if anyone out there is from, oh, we're filmed, I love Duke, thank you very much, right? I don't want to get kicked out of my alma mater, all right? My point is that different groups require different things, but interestingly, all of our students have responded to being told that they're loved, and that's important. So the third phase was we needed to create a new higher education model, and that's what we did. It's called the New Urban College Model, and this is what it looks like. First principle, we over me. The needs of the community supersede the wants of the individual. This is about the common good. You don't get to be selfish at Paul Quinn College. We would argue if you're going to lead in under-resourced communities, selfishness has to go out the window. One might argue that should be the standard in all communities, but we're not giving that speech this morning. The point is that this is who we are, right? We use our talents for the benefits of others. Secondly, experiential learning. We can teach anyone anything if we incorporate the lessons of their lives and their backgrounds into the lesson plan, right? If you enter one of the classes that I teach, and I teach an Introduction to Servant Leadership class, many times I use the first 15 to 20 minutes of class to let the students talk about what's on their mind for that day. And then my challenge as an instructor is to find a way to incorporate that into my lesson plan. All right? Makes it a little free-flowing, but my students seem to retain their information, but more importantly, they get an opportunity to help design it themselves, right? So we look for ways to engage their history and their past into the present in the classroom. And lastly, debt is bad. Do we need to explain that, or is it? Okay, all right. So here's how it works. Everyone works at our college. We are the first urban work college. There are 7 work colleges, but they're all in rural places, and the students are doing interesting things, but we couldn't sell farming and pottery and all that to an urban demographic. So we had to do it a little bit differently. Our students spend the first 2 years working on campus, developing a proficiency in work. The last 2 years, we recruit employers to give them jobs in the areas that they're interested in. So this does a couple of things. First of all, everyone on our campus is full employment, right? But let's not pretend students aren't working anyway, right? Why don't we give them jobs or help them get jobs that help them with their careers, okay? So that's the first thing. Everyone works. We are a work college. They work 10 to 20 hours per week. It helps reduce their debt. Number 2, reduce tuition and fees. We were charging $23,850 all in to go to school. Not much when you consider the cost of some of our highly priced liberal arts and state schools. But it was too much. Our students couldn't afford it. So we cut it by $10,000. Right? We charge $14,300, and this is how you pay for it. Our tuition is forever locked to the Pell Grant amount. Right? So $5,800, boom, gone because you get the Pell Grant. $5,000 is a work credit. Right? So because we're a work college, because you're working, you earn that money by your service. So that knocks out $5,000 more. So now we're down to only $3,500 exposed of the $14,300. $1,200 of that is taken care of either through Texas Equalization Grant money or from SEOG money. So the average Paul Quinn College student picks up another $1,200, which means you only have $2,300 of unmet need, which if you choose to, your total debt service will be less than $10,000. It'll be about $9,000 for you to borrow to go to school. But we have a summer bridge program where students all come. That's paid for through summer Pell Grant money, or not, I'll explain that later. But the point is they do that for free. They pick up 9 credit hours. You need to average 15 credit hours a semester to graduate on time. You're 9, you have 6, 7 semesters left to pick up the remaining 6 credit hours. You can graduate a semester early, which means you only have $8,000 of debt. Very proud of that model. Free books. There is no reason in the day of the internet to charge and assign $200 textbooks unless you're friends with the authors, right? Or you are an author. So we challenged our faculty to create a model that didn't require students buying textbooks. So our students have free books. Lastly, entrepreneurship. We are challenging the students to find the solutions to the communities they come from. We tell people someone is going to figure out how to fix inner city, urban, under-resourced communities. Why shouldn't it be the people who grew up there? We think that's what matters. Now, went the wrong direction. So, pros and cons. The pros, our enrollment, which has been growing, it's grown almost 200% since 2010. Last year, when we fully implemented the program, it jumped by 55%, right? So clearly, we have struck a chord. Improved student engagement and readiness. We're educating students 24 hours a day because of the work program. We're seeing students being more engaged. We're approaching their readiness differently. Expanded footprint. It gets our students out into the community more, into companies more, have more relationships. We do need to raise money. It helps with that. Fundraising successes. Turns out lots of rich people like this idea of people learning how to work and work better, workforce readiness. They give big gifts. I love that part. All right. Here are the cons. Learning curve for students and staff. Listen, professors didn't go to school to learn how to manage students in workstations, okay? So you have to encourage them. We have found the fact that we don't have tenure to be very helpful in encouraging faculty to embrace this new model, all right? The other piece of it is for students, they have this immediate gratification philosophy, right? I work, why shouldn't I see the money? Well, so this is a debt mentality. Some would rather borrow money and put off having to deal with the consequences than not having to borrow money at all. So we've had to develop a class on work. We miss this because, frankly, if you are a Pell Grant student, your family has had a long-term dysfunctional relationship with work. Doesn't mean you're bad people at all. It just means you've either had unemployment for large periods of time or you're underemployed, right? So we have to educate through that. Also, startup capital. Well, change. People resist change, but you all at TFA, you know that already. You just keep going. You just run through them. I like that theory. All right. Startup capital. There is startup cost to this model. But that being said, it's startup costs that we have found you're capable of raising or you're capable of reconfiguring your budget to be able to do it. Look, we have a $5 million endowment. If we can do it, anybody can do it, okay? Lastly, when you make these changes, when you have a new urban college model, you have really happy students. Look at these guys. They're smiling. They look nice. But the reality of it is, and I'm just going to go through and give you a story about each of these students. His high school asked me to take him as a favor. His grades were terrible. Each time he goes home for Christmas, his family tries to tell him that he can't cut it in college. All right, we have to pull him back and love him. He's extraordinary. What no one bothered to tell him was that he was dyslexic. We can teach you through that. He's been to 4 colleges, has a very wonderful mother, not such a great dad, wonderful young man. We finally got him settled. He had a 3.5 last semester. From inner city Chicago, wonderful young lady, doing well, has been the class officer each class that she's been in. She's a junior now. High school grades, average at best, below average, test scores below average. Nothing said she should be as successful as she is. Miss Paul Quinn is originally from El Salvador, was an undocumented student. We've had to help her through those issues. Is dealing with a mother who is suffering from severe mental illness. Has been an extraordinary student for us, is carrying a 3.8. Ariel, Ariel is our student body president, right? Done amazing things. The issues that she has overcome have been extraordinary, and watching her develop, she will be a phenomenal leader before all is said and done. Tiana is our freshman basketball star. It was amazing what happened once she got glasses, right? You see the basket a lot better. Just an amazing young lady, posted a 3.7 last semester. I don't know anyone who has had a better start to a college career than Kevin Lee, all right? Inroads, he was selected for our Duke Immerse partnership where our students spent a semester at Duke. He was the only freshman selected at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, trying to encourage minority students to be interested in getting doctorates. Was selected for the Emerging Leaders Program, University of San Diego, or University of California, San Diego. Lumina features him this month in a magazine coming out about black males in college. Freshman class president, sophomore class president, is carrying a 3.8 and lives in our dormitory because he is homeless, right? Ryan, actually, he's just a middle-class kid from Dallas, right? I promised him I would never tell you who his dad is because he's a little bit embarrassed, but let me just say this, his dad was a pop star, right? So you figure it out by looking at him. I'm not telling. But the point is, he's carrying a 3.6 and is a wonderful young man. We have students that run the gambit, but the single most important part of all of them is they believe they have a responsibility for leaving places better than they found them. At the end of the day, isn't that what we all should do? Thank you for the honor of your time, and good luck to you.
One of the nice things about the panel today is that they gave us some great themes. So we have microphones here, so while I do some filler talk for people who we do have time for questions, so I want you to go make yourself known at the microphone. I'll ask you to just at least identify yourself and to ask a question. But one of the themes that jumps right out at me, there are two actually that I would talk about. One is the theme about love and leading with love and caring. So whether it's the love from a parent entrusting us as educators and leaders with their children, or the love that you need to have to pull people through a real challenging time. And then the second one is this idea that parents and community are the real asset that we're not drawing from, that if we stay focused on solely the K-12 realm, that we won't be able to see that whole big part of the orange that Alejandro talked about.
Good morning. Is it on? You're on. Thank you all for presenting. I am Susan Hendricks Richmond. I am part of the 1990 Corps. I work in the field. Thank you. I currently work in early care and education, or ECE, so my question is for the two women who spoke to that. And I'm curious to know, within the New York City school system or within Montessori for All, how you bring in the family child care providers for the last several years. That's what the area in which I've been working, and I often find that we are kind of not necessarily included in the equation. I know that like the early Head Starts do reach out, I understand that, but by and large in the birth to grave, if you will, that in the continuum there, frequently again we're kind of put to the side, not drawn into the larger equation and not necessarily considered. So if you could address that.
Sure. Hi. A couple of different ways. First, there are family child care providers that are serving kids birth to 3 in our system. So we've tried to work more closely with them to build a pipeline into pre-K to help with the outreach. Actually, just formed a partnership yesterday with one of our big advocacy organizations in New York to collaborate with our outreach team for that purpose. We also have another agency, the Administration for Children's Services, that provides monitoring and support to the family child care networks, has been trying to increase professional development opportunities for them. And then there are some group family daycares that actually become pre-K providers. So it's a smaller ratio, they can only have 12 kids, but they get licensed through the Department of Health. They go to the same professional developments as our other providers and are held to the same expectations.
We don't have a good answer yet. It's something that is at the top of our priority list. We're thinking a lot about how we communicate information to families to empower them to think about what they should be looking for in schools and what kinds of questions they should be asking throughout their children's time. So we just redesigned our progress report card model to be a lot more clear with different colors and different ways of communicating information that open up more of a dialogue for families and also include ways to support their children around the things that we're driving towards socially, emotionally, and academically. But it's a continuing challenge and one that is a huge priority because we know that as they were describing the orange and the amount of time that children are in school is one small slice of that. And so the more we can build the partnership, the more we're gonna have a systemic change.
Hi, Lynn Cartwright-Panett. I run a math ed nonprofit in New York City. So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that the parents I work with put a lot of trust in schools. And they, I think, really believe that if they send their kids to a good kindergarten, a good elementary school, middle school, high school, college, that their kids will get a career and everything will be great. And especially in math, and especially in affluent communities, that's not actually what's happening. So in affluent communities, students are going to robotics clubs and math enrichment and summer camps, and the expanded scope of education is this immense ecosystem that parents have never heard of. And so I'm wondering how we can communicate better with parents, with the public, even with educators in low-income communities about what success looks like, in particular in math and engineering, and how we create that same success for our kids.
It's such a great question because I mean, I guess it's about informing and making certain that parents know what's available. I will say, I think, sort of as the panel has also described, I think it's also about what more should we make sure is excellent in the out-of-school time space, and also what needs to exist. I mean, one of the things that I just realized from being a former 6th grade teacher is that many of my students' parents were working incredibly hard. And so their ability to actually find those right summer opportunities like Springboard and all that were just really limited just to their own capacity. So I don't know, I would just say that I think it's super important for us to really think about how do we bring some of those things closer, especially into communities that are significantly under-resourced in various ways.
So one of the things that we've noticed is that those options and opportunities don't exist in our neighborhood, right around the college. So we're having to create them. But what's fascinating about it, so my son is 5 and has been doing all those extra enrichment activities from the moment he could even hold his head up, right? And as we have conversations with the people who provide those opportunities about coming, would they be interested if we gave free space, holding those opportunities on our campus so that other people could have them? Some are interested, but a surprising number aren't. So some of what we have to do is identify people who would be even willing to do that. And frankly, I think it's a wonderful business idea, right? You know, grab folks who understand how important this is and, you know, run them during the summer. Because I'm telling you, colleges have capacity to have space to offer those services. And I'm sure more than a few would be interested in doing it.
Hi, my name is Kate Hill. I was a Houston 2010 Corps member, and I worked at Yes Prep, where our goal was to send 100% of the students to college, which I thought was a really admirable goal. But I had this sort of uncomfortable feeling that even when students got to college, they just weren't going to receive adequate opportunities or support and enrichment to really make it all the way through. So I really appreciated the college section talk that you gave. I thought it was really inspiring. I'm now a graduate student working on my PhD in biology, and something that has really struck me is that people who are teaching at the college level are probably in the top echelon of students who this particular subject kind of came naturally to them. And so it can be really difficult to reach all learners when they think, oh, everyone's here and is college ready, and that may not be the case. So are there any instructional methods or techniques you found that have worked at really inspiring these faculty who may be experts in their field to try and devote themselves to becoming excellent teachers and really reaching all learners, recognizing the opportunity gap doesn't stop just because you've graduated from 12th grade?
Yeah. That is a great point. And you know, I think a couple of things. One, and I've written about this, we reward tenure for the wrong things. Right? Like, tenure is not about how great of a teacher you are. Now, there are some schools that say, oh, we evaluate teaching and blah. Yeah. Not on the same level as you do your writing and your grants and things like that. So I think part of it is a challenge on our part to re-emphasize teaching. The other piece of it is who we attract to the profession and where we attract them to work. We are starting an initiative. It's called an Urban Faculty Initiative, which shamelessly has been modeled after TFA, right? Where we are going out recruiting people who are graduating with their doctorates and saying, come work for 3 years at this set of urban colleges, and at the end of those 3 years, you know, you have a body of work that you can write about. If you want to stay, great. But what we're going to challenge you with is to develop a pedagogical model for urban areas. Right? Like, to explicitly challenge them, because we think the opportunity in that space is to reach people who are just coming out, who still have the ability to change and look at it differently, than trying to inspire folks who have been doing it for 30 years to say, well, maybe you should do it different. It's just counterintuitive to us. So I think you're starting to see more people wrestling with that question and really trying to work it, because everyone's not at the same preparedness level.
So it's really been interesting in our work at Braven to work with San Jose State, which is a school of 26,000 students, and Rutgers Newark, which is a school of 7,000 students, to actually work alongside some associate deans, which is actually how we became a credit-bearing course at San Jose State. And I would definitely say that they're a part of the folks who have been teaching a long time and definitely came into being professors with a very different mindset. But how open they've actually been to working alongside us has been deeply inspiring, and where they've actually said, look, what you all are doing, we just can't do, so we're super excited to partner. That said, I would say in the world of higher ed, we need more folks running schools like Paul Quinn, but honestly, more people coming into higher ed and beginning to help evolve it, because I would say it's definitely painfully behind in terms of what our group of students really needs to be successful. But you can find the pockets of great people everywhere who really want to make sure that all students succeed.
And I think we need to attack it from both angles, like the angle of making colleges stronger at supporting all children, but also empowering our children so that they have the agency they need, so that when they get to college, they are advocates for themselves and they're learners and they know how to ask questions and they know how to monitor their progress and seek help when they need it. We've got to do it from both angles.
That was a very Montessori answer. And by the way, my son goes to Montessori.
And so do my kids. My kids have all gone to Montessori.
What we want for ours, we want to get to all. I'm sorry, this is going to be the last question because we're at time. But the panelists, after we thank them, you can come and ask them. We want to give a little bit of time, so make it good.
No pressure. So my name is Annalise Shum, and I'm a 2011 Jacksonville Corps member. I was placed there to teach biology, and I stayed in my classroom for 4 years. And then I had this epiphany that 10% of science education is done in the formal environment, and 90% of everything all of you know about science comes from informal educational opportunities. So I have since transitioned out of the classroom into museum education. And my question for you, if we're talking about these expanding the scope of education and community partnerships, how are you guys engaging with the informal opportunities to really cultivate lifelong learning for your students and their families and the community? So are you guys reaching out for those libraries, those zoos, those museums? How can we really make this a movement that goes beyond the classroom?
Thanks.
I was trying. They said things make it good.
So for our pre-K expansion, we've started to do more and more of that. We have a partnership with the Children's Museum of Manhattan where they actually created, we started with this event in the evening to attract hundreds of pre-K families in where they would get a reduced membership. But while they were there, the chancellor addressed them, and it was basically just not a free-for-all, but they were able to really explore the museum while getting the membership. And we had our instructional coaches there to work with the families on how they could make the most of that opportunity. So it wasn't just, okay, my kid's gonna go play, but they could have guided, sort of like a guided tour that would help them when they come back to the museum. We're trying to branch out to more museums for that. For the libraries, some of our libraries actually have pre-K programs now, but we're trying to work more with them to help connect what we're doing with our curriculum to what they're offering to families. So we have about 20 branches now where they have a pre-K for all section with the books that are in our New York City curriculum unit. So that's for parents and teachers who come to the libraries.
We don't think we can concede 1 minute of the time that our students are enrolled, all right? So we cover everything. I mean, we have a dress code and a clothes closet so we could teach students how to dress appropriately to present yourself. The work program allows us to recapture that time that they would be gone. We organize off-campus field trips so that our students get the opportunity to engage and see more of the city. And all of us on the staff take it as part of our mission to create these opportunities. We partner with the Dallas Symphony, and they play a free concert on our campus every summer so that we could introduce the arts into the community we serve, because we think the key is finding inspiration points, right? Finding moments where the light bulb goes off, and those come differently to different people. So we think it's literally just about building that in and just refusing to concede any time as time that doesn't qualify as classroom time.
Thank you.
All right, if we can give the panelists a round of applause. We're going to break and give you all time to come up and ask questions individually if you need to, or get to the next session. I hope you learned something today. I certainly got a lot of these panelists' comments. Thanks again.